outside the presence of the jury, Mr. Hobby?
Thank you, Your Honor. Part of the reason for the delay is that we've been looking for a phone bill. Miss Adams on the 18th said that she wanted to get a phone bill, and there's a receipt for that showing that that's what she had done. And we're having trouble finding it. The state agrees that it will come in when we find it. I don't think we'll have any issues finding it. We know it's been part of the record at some point in this case. And so, the only question I would have is since it would be marked Defendant's Exhibit A. I have a blank piece of paper with Exhibit A. It really is a reminder that you're on it.
Okay.
And the question becomes how to reference it. I don't have it there as a copy of Ms. Adams, so how does the jury know of its existence at that point?
Why don't you say I don't have the actual bill, Ms. Adams, but it is Exhibit A and has been agreed to be admitted, and here are my questions.
That's fine by me.
If I may,
Yes.
we can just refer that there is a phone bill, and then when it's located, say we're going to introduce as Exhibit A, because I'm just in case.
I'm fine with that.
So your proposal, Mr. Wall, is for him to reference that we have a phone bill, your phone bill, Ms. Adams, that you paid for, and whatever questions you have.
Right. When we find it, we can just make a little record in front of the jury that the defense there's Exhibit A, which is the phone bill.
That's fine.
Okay.
Do we get the jury?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. Ready for Mr. Hobbaker to cross-examine Ms. Adams. Ms. Adams, for the jury still on. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am. Can you bring that microphone up to you just a little bit? Thank you. The Peugeot that you had, did you ever have any issues with your window?
Sometimes it got stuck.
Yeah. Sometimes it would malfunction, you wouldn't be able to close it all the way.
Yeah, just, yes.
As a matter of fact, most people understand that if it's raining, you'd like to be able to close the windows, but sometimes you have difficulty doing that, correct?
Yes.
And the solution would be to try to put plastic over that window, is that correct?
Yes.
And that would have been a back window of the Peugeot?
Yes.
So you were together with Mr. Liggins since about January 1990, is that correct?
Yes.
And he stayed with you often, but he also had a residence at the Hillside Inn?
Yes.
And he lived alone there, did he not?
Yes.
And on the 17th, Mr. Liggins had called you sort of early in the evening and indicated for sometime during the day that he was going to take Mr. Barker to Davenport.
Yes.
You don't know where they were going in Davenport.
No.
And you really have no way of testifying how often Mr. Liggins had been over to Davenport or how well he knew Davenport.
No.
In fact, it's your understanding that you may not have known Davenport very well in comparison to, say, Milan and Milan and Rock Island, that sort of thing, right?
He could have known it just as well. I don't know. I know he had family there, so I'm sure he was over there.
Do you know where they live?
I do not remember now.
Both you and Mr. Liggins had cleaned the car before,
Yes,
and I believe the testimony would have been that Saturday.
yes,
If my dates are right, that would have been the 15th of September, correct?
yes,
And you were the one responsible for cleaning inside the car.
yes,
I noticed that in the picture of the trunk of the car, that there were buckets and sponges and that sort of thing. Those were in the trunk as far as you know, right?
Yes.
They weren't put there or anything like that. That's what you had in the trunk.
yes,
Okay. And I'm assuming buckets and sponges and that sort of thing would be used for cleaning.
yes,
And you used Armor All on the inside?
yes.
What Armor All products were you using?
The Armor All that cleans vinyl and leather.
The spray bottle?
Yes,
And on the 17th, well, let me ask you about that car again. Mr. Walton asked you if the primarily drove the Peugeot, and I believe your answer was Mr. Liggins. Is that correct?
yes,
But Mr. Liggins is not the only individual that ever drove that Peugeot, correct?
correct,
You had driven the Peugeot, correct?
correct.
And at some point, had your sister's daughter driven the Peugeot?
My daughter's sister.
I flipped it around. Your daughter's sister had used it once or twice, is that correct?
Yes,
You remember when that was, or just know that they used it?
I don't remember when.
And your daughter's sister used it once or twice. Is there anybody else besides yourself, Mr. Liggins, and your daughter's sister that would have maybe used it?
No,
So, the 17th, Mr. Liggins returns to your house around midnight. Have you told individuals that when he showed up that night that he'd been drinking? You could tell he'd been drinking?
no,
You didn't tell anybody that?
no, not that I remember.
Okay. Do you remember if he'd been drinking?
No,
You remember telling Investigator Noon that he appeared to have been drinking, that when he drinks alcohol, he gets what she described as stupid, that he gets stupid when he drinks. You remember telling him that?
I do not remember that.
Is that the truth, though? He gets stupid when he's been drinking?
I don't remember.
Or that... Now, when you went out, Mr. Liggins returns to your house at midnight, and you say that Mr. Liggins seemed in a different mood, and that he told you some things. I'm not trying to be indelicate here, ma'am, but prior to that night, had you and Mr. Liggins been intimate?
Yes,
And prior to that night, had Mr. Liggins informed you that he may have had a venereal disease?
no,
But following these events in early October, did you learn that you had contracted one?
yes,
Isn't it true, ma'am, that the only person that you could have contracted that from would be Mr. Liggins?
yes,
Now, Mr. Liggins stayed the night with you on the 17th, correct?
yes,
You have no knowledge that after he came home at midnight that he went anywhere until you both woke up in the morning, correct?
correct,
You're You're not hearing doors open, doors slam, you're not hearing the Cujo leave or anything like that.
I heard nothing.
And so, by your reason to believe that even though, when people are sleeping, it's hard to know what's going on, you have no reason to believe that Mr. Liggins was anywhere but at your house until you woke up in the morning and took him home.
Yeah, I have no idea.
And when you went out in the early morning and you grabbed something out of your car, the car was there, correct?
Yes,
And at that point, you did not notice anything unusual as far as smells or anything like that with the car, did you?
I did not at that time.
It wasn't until the next day that you noticed a gas smell when the car was running, correct?
I don't know if it was when it was running. It was when I smelled it. I don't know if it was when I first got in it, before I started it. I don't remember.
And do you remember telling the officers at the time you believe it might be related to a mechanical issue with the vehicle?
No, I do not.
Were you having some mechanical problems with the vehicle?
I don't remember.
Your Honor, may I have a motion?
Yes, you did.
Ma'am, do you remember providing some testimony in the deposition back in 1992?
No,
Do you doubt that you did?
no, I do not doubt it.
Okay. You don't need to read this out loud. I'm just going to show you, if you want to read from line 7 down to line 13.
Okay, Brenda.
Does that help refresh your memory? Well, let me ask you this. In that testimony, when you were asked, where did you smell those statements, did you reply, just when I was driving, probably I was driving? You remember saying that?
No,
Do you have any doubt that that's accurate, that you did say?
no,
And then, when asked, did you have any occasions to get in the back seat or look in the back seat at all that day, did you reply, no, I smelled them while I was driving?
that's what it says.
And again, you don't have any reason to doubt that the reporter took that out.
No.
Now, you went to your car, you went back inside, you woke up the next morning, and you took Mr. Liggins back to Hillside, correct?
Yes,
And you dropped him off there, correct?
yes,
And at that point, then, you would not have had access to your vehicle quite clearly, correct?
correct.
And then, did you go shopping after that?
I did.
Now, we've had some talk about shopping as far as for birthday gifts and things like that, but whether or not that happened on Sunday, you know that at least on the 18th, you went and dropped off Mr. Liggins and went shopping for something, whether birthday presents or whatnot, after you dropped him off.
Yes,
And indeed, did you go pay a phone bill?
I have.
Do you have a memory, and I know it's been a while, of law enforcement wanting to verify that you had went and paid a phone bill?
I don't remember that. No.
Do you remember if they went with you to your mother's residence to give you an opportunity to get the bill?
I don't remember that.
If I showed you a report that described that, would that help refresh your memory?
I'm not sure.
We'll give it a shot.
Okay.
Just the last paragraph, just repeat what you're doing, you have to read it out loud, okay? Does that help that you actually went and got the bill for him?
Yes,
Okay. And indeed, that verify that you had paid a phone bill. By the way, where would that have been? Where would you have gone to pay it?
Probably the phone company
Where was that? Do you remember?
is Moline.
Moline or East Moline?
Moline.
So, you had to drive there. Fair enough.
Yes.
So you drove to Peugeot there, and do you have any reason to doubt that that would have been? So, a little before 1 o'clock on the 18th.
I don't know.
Okay. If the receipt would show that
Yes.
that's when it was paid, you have no reason to doubt it.
Correct.
Okay, so it's 1 o'clock on the 18th, you've got that car stamped on with you.
Right.
And then ultimately, when you had the conversation with Mr. Liggins about what had happened to Jennifer, he had said to you that it was just terrible, correct?
Correct.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. This is what I meant. We're talking about the night of the 17th going into the 18th. You went out to the Peugeot at approximately 2 a.m., is that correct?
Yes.
And you said you went to get something.
Yes.
Did you sit in the car at that time?
Probably for a minute.
Did you find what you were looking for?
Yes.
So you think you were in it for a total of maybe a minute
A minute or less.
or less, just to get something?
Yes.
Keep the door open when you went in to get something?
Yes.
What you needed, where was it?
It was in the front, probably the glove box.
You just opened the door, sat in the car, kept the door open, and grabbed something out of the glove box.
Probably had to sit down to reach the glove box.
And then you exited the car,
Yes.
again, never shutting the door. Were you sleeping before you went out there?
I was probably very tired. I don't know if I was sleeping.
And then you went back inside.
Yes.
Now, when asked whether Mr. Liggins, when previously asked by Mr. Hallbreaker if you knew if Mr. Liggins was there all night, did you say no idea?
No idea.
You have no memory of him leaving, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't hear him leaving,
Correct.
but you don't know whether he left or not.
Correct.
He was there in the morning.
Yes.
And then the next day, on the morning of the 18th, you're in the Peugeot again.
Yes.
And at that time, how much time were you spending? How much time did you spend in the Peugeot the next morning?
Quite a bit of time I drove Stanley back to the hillside.
Actually drove it,
Correct.
so the doors were shut.
Yes.
You were spending a little bit of time in it,
Yes.
and that's when you smelled gas.
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything further?
Yes, Your Honor. Just a couple of things to clean up. Ms. Adams, this is a tough question. Do you happen to remember what your phone number was? 1990?
It was 787-2384. I don't know. I had it a long time.
Yes, you did. Would that be area code? Let's see, back then I think it was 319,
It was 309.
309.
I believe, area code, I don't know.
Oh, okay, but 787-2384 is what you remember.
All Island was 787, yes.
Have you testified previously that when Stanley had come home at midnight, that he actually was sitting down, laying down, something like that, and he had his head in your lap?
Yes.
Okay. Did you smell any gasoline on Mr. Liggins?
I don't recall that at all. No.
And in all the times that you testified in 2 trials and the depositions and things like that, you've never said that you smelled gasoline on Mr. Liggins?
That's correct.
Okay. So I know that your memory might be difficult now, but it's never been part of your memory during those.
That's correct.
Thank you, ma'am.
Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. Statement called second, please.
Your Honor, the state calls Exay Desai to the stand. Come forward and be sworn, Mr. Desai.
Just come right up here, sir. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear firm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. All right, that's it right here. You're not going to shoot speak. Go ahead.
Thank you. Tell us your name, please.
Exay Desai.
And can you either bring the microphone close to you or bring yourself?
Exay Desai.
Will you spell your first name for us?
AXAY
And your last name?
DESAI.
Mr. Desai, what city do you currently live in?
Humble, Texas.
Humble? Can you spell Humble for us?
HUMBLE.
What big city is that near?
Houston.
Is it a suburb of Houston?
Actually, it's part of Houston, close to International Airport.
It's close to the international airport.
Correct.
What do you do there?
It's a hotel business.
You're in the hotel business? Yes?
Yes.
And you own a hotel there?
Yes.
Back in 1990, were you in the hotel business as well?
Yes.
And was your business located in Illinois?
Rock Island.
How long, as of 1990, how long had you been in the hotel business in Rock Island?
Kind of 10, 11 years.
10 or 11 years?
Yes.
And what was the name of the hotel?
Hillside Inn.
I'm going to show you what has been admitted into evidence as State's Exhibit 5. Is the hillside inn depicted in this exhibit?
Yes.
And is it over here on the left side of the exhibit?
Yep.
I think what I'm going to do now I'll put the State's Exhibit 5 on the easel here, so we can refer to it. Okay, so you've already testified that what I'm pointing to here on the left side of the Exhibit 5 is the hillside inn. It's sort of a L shape.
Correct.
Then there's another building over here. What is that?
Like office and residence quarter.
Right. The residence quarter
Yep.
for your family?
For the manager or like family.
All right. And what street is this that I'm pointing to in Rock Island?
11th Street.
And what am I pointing to here?
12th Street.
So the address of the hillside inn was on 11?
Yes.
Now, I'm pointing to this building here, I guess in the shape of an eye, just a long building. What is this?
It's probably apartments,
Just an apartment building?
apartment buildings.
And I believe it's been referred to by other witnesses as the Hillside Apartments. But did it in 1990 have any relationship to the Hillside Inn?
No,
However, it does appear that there is a driveway connecting the Hillside Inn to this apartment building. Is that right?
yes,
So one could drive from the Hillside Inn to the apartment building without going out onto the street.
yes,
And it appears that there is a driveway that leads onto 12th Street here. Is that right?
yes,
And then there's also, is this a driveway as well that leads from the hotel to 11th Street?
correct.
It appears to go under maybe a canopy.
Canopy,
We're done with that. I think we all are familiar with hotels, but can you tell us what kind of rental agreements the Hillside Inn had with its customers in 1990?
it's by day and by week.
So they could rent rooms by day or by week?
Correct.
In 1990, did Stanley Liggins rent a room at the Hillside Inn?
Yes,
Did he rent under the name Stanley Liggins?
no,
He rented under a different name?
different name.
Do you recall what that name was?
No, I don't.
Do you recognize Stanley Liggins in the courtroom today?
Yeah,
And will you describe where he's located and what he's wearing?
the glasses, black glasses,
I'm at one table. Is he at the other council table?
yes,
And he's the individual with the dark glasses?
correct.
And he's the person who rented a room at the Hillside Inn in September of 1990?
Yes,
Do you recall what the room number was?
54.
What we're looking at here, Mr. Desai, is State's Exhibit 69. Is that an area of the Hillside Inn?
Yes,
Is that how it looked in September of 1990?
yes,
And does it depict room 54?
50. It's upstairs.
I think what I'll do, in fairness, because it's kind of far away, isn't it? So I'm going to hand you as well the actual exhibit. And so this, and I'll ask you again, if State's Exhibit 54, or State's Exhibit 69 shows us room 54.
Yes,
And where is it located?
it's upstairs on the corner.
We see
Yeah, on the
a
left, yeah,
We see part of the hotel, it obviously has two hotel rooms on both the first floor and second,
no, second,
right? And then up there at the very last door, we see at the left side of the picture,
correct,
that's room 54.
54.
And then it appears that where that number 5 is, that's a stairwell, am I correct?
Yes,
Now, to the right on the photograph of Exhibit 69, can you tell us what hotel room that would have been?
55,
So then on the other side of 54, we don't see,
53, I can see the door.
you can't see it, but you can tell us
So
where the,
54, 53, 52,
all right, on down off the left.
left, correct.
Okay. Still looking at, excuse me, still looking at Exhibit 69, where we see the stairwell. Were there any sort of storage areas in that stairwell?
This used to be like, yes, on the big, underneath the staircase.
Okay, Mr. Desai, we're now looking at State's Exhibit 71. And does that photo depict the storage area in the stairwell?
Yes.
And it should be obvious from the picture, but tell us what sort of things were stored in that storage area.
Like some aluminum cans and like bags.
All right, aluminum cans and bags.
Bags.
And that's what it looked like at the hotel?
Looks like yes.
And now it looks like the door was open. Is the door typically kept, was in September of 1990, was the door typically kept open?
I think there's no lock, so like normally it's open.
Everyone had access to it?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Desai, we're now looking at State's Exhibit 72. This is a close-up photograph of the area depicted in 71, isn't that right?
Yes.
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 And once again, we see a close-up of that storage area and indeed see many aluminum cans, yes?
Yes.
And bags,
Bags.
big garbage bags.
Garbage. Yes.
And Mr. Desai, did all the hotel rooms at the Hillside Inn, can you tell us whether or not they had telephones?
Yes, they do have telephones.
And were they your, what we call landlines?
Landlines.
Back in the day, we didn't need to call things landlines because they were just telephones.
Just telephones, right?
But now that we have cell phones, we have to distinguish. So it was a landline, they were landlines.
Landlines.
And how was the billing done as far as for the rooms at the Hillside Inn telephones?
I guess they have to call the main hotel number and there's the extension for like every hotel rooms has the extension.
So there would just be one bill for the entire hotel?
That's correct.
Not for each
Each room, no.
Not for each individual room?
No.
Can you tell us how often linens were changed at the Hillside Inn?
Normally, if the customer check out, we clean the room once they check out. And if they stay by week, the request or when it's service, we can use to clean the room.
And do you recall what kind of, you said some people at the Hillside Inn, it would be by week, and some would rent rooms by the day. Do you recall what Stanley Liggins' arrangement was?
It's by day.
By the day. I have no further questions for you, Mr. Desai. These attorneys may have questions.
Any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. How long, do you know how long Mr. Liggins had lived there before September 17th, 1990?
I believe a couple of weeks probably.
Thank you. Sir, just to be clear, Exhibit 69, which shows a portion of the Hillside Inn, the color in that picture with those square tail lights, you don't have any knowledge that that's Mr. Liggins' car has anything to do with this case, correct?
I guess the red car I see he used to drive, and same car or not on the picture probably. I can recognize because it's dark pictures, I guess.
That's fine, that's fine. Let me show you the State's Exhibit 5. I'll try to stand here so that everybody can see me, just so we're absolutely clear. If somebody said they live at the Hillside Inn, it would be the building with the reddish-brown roof and L shape, correct?
Correct.
And if somebody said, I live at the Hillside Apartments, where would they be living? Do you know what these buildings are here?
I don't know the name, but it just looks apartments before at the time.
You just don't know if it's referred to as the Hillside Apartments.
No, I don't know the name.
Hillside Apartments, do you know, are there Hillside Apartments in that area?
Oh, I don't know.
All right, the difficulty on this map is on the photograph that was Exhibit 69, which is the one with the car, and has the room numbers, 54, I believe, was upstairs, correct? Do you know where 54 is on Exhibit 5 on this L shape, the right-hand side?
It's like,
I'm going to approach.
Let's go ahead.
Over here, so we're looking at, this is upside down. Okay, so I'm just going to try to get a reference correct. So the Hillside Inn, as it appears on Exhibit 5, looks like an L shape. There's a left-hand side and then a bottom side, the base of the L. And you're saying 54 would be on the base of that L, just past what looks like a white stairwell, correct? Okay. And do you know where room number 12 is at the Hillside Inn? There's no number 12? Okay. Do you know where number 1 would be at the Hillside Inn? Okay. What was the numbering system then?
it's start from 21 to 58.
21 to 58.
Correct.
So if I said I lived at room number 10 at the Hillside Inn, you'd say, where is that?
Correct.
Thank you, sir.
Any further?
No, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, the state would propose to read in the transcript of Peter John Tree Stevens. It is proposed Exhibit 510. That will be read into the record by Tracy Halverson, M.D.
All right, and what year is this transcript?
1995.
1995 transcript, Exhibit 510.
It's Halverson, Halvorson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Peter John Tree Stevens, called as a witness by the state, being first duly sworn by the court, was examined and testified as follows. Doctor, will you hold the microphone to your chin and tell these folks who you are?
My name is Peter John Treve, Treeve, Stevens, Stephen's.
And your profession, please.
I'm a pathologist.
That's a doctor?
Yes.
Tell us about your educational background.
Yes, sir. Following graduation from high school, I attended the Faculty of Science at McGill, McGill University in Montreal, Canada, graduating with a degree of Bachelor of Science in May of 1961. I then entered the medical school of the same university and graduated with a degree of Doctor of Medicine in May of 1965. After that, I did a year of rotating internship at a teaching hospital of McGill University in Montreal, Canada, from 1965 to 1966. In July of 1966, I moved to Richmond, Virginia, and did 2 years of training as a pathology resident at the Medical College in Richmond, Virginia. In 1966, I moved back to Canada and did the last 2 years of my residency at the University of Western Ontario in London, Canada. In 1970, I finished my residency, and after passing the examination of the American Board of Pathology, I entered the practice of pathology in Battle Creek, Michigan. In 1977, I moved to Davenport, Iowa, and practiced pathology with the Quad Cities Pathologist Group from February of 1977 to December of 1989. On the 1st of January 1990, I set up a private practice of forensic pathology in Bettendorf, Iowa, and did that until I was offered the position as a pathologist in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where I moved in July of 1991.
First of all, and you've been doing that since?
Yes.
And first of all, what is a pathologist?
A pathologist is a physician who practices medicine in a laboratory setting. Typically, a pathologist does not routinely see patients during office hours, although we all see patients in consultations from time to time. But we work with individual patient samples, blood samples, urine samples, saliva samples, fluid samples, a variety of samples, and work with tissue specimens all the way from blood smears or pap smears to looking at and examining organs that are removed at the time of surgery for diagnosis and then at the time of death. We are commonly asked to do autopsies on the bodies of decedents in order to determine the cause or manner of death.
Are there boards or societies which certify physicians in this particular area?
Well, there are professional societies that the pathologists belong to. They are separate from the certifying authorities in pathology. There is a certifying authority, which is the American Board of Pathology, which comes under the umbrella or authority of the American Board of Medical Specialists. And the American Board of Pathology certifies people in pathology and subspecialty care areas.
To become certified, what is required?
It requires the completion of a course of training, which is acceptable to the American Board of Pathology. When I was certified, the course of required training was 4 years, and then about 5 or 10 years later, it changed to 5 years. Now you have to take 5 years. When I passed through the program, it took 4 years of training in a prescribed and accredited training program, at the end of which time you are allowed to take the examinations that the American Board puts on. If you passed the American Board's examination, you were certified. If you didn't, then you came back and tried again.
You are certified?
Yes, I am.
There's also another specialty within pathology groups that you haven't told us about?
The American Board of Pathology has, I think, about a dozen individual subspecialty areas in pathology, which require an additional year of training or the equivalent thereof, and passing all the examinations.
Is one of those forensic pathology?
Yes.
What is involved in becoming certified in forensic pathology?
To become certified as a forensic pathologist, you either have to take a year of additional training, which is approved by the American Board of Pathology, or you have to have experience working in the field, equivalent to 1 year of training time. And you send in your experience and references and evidence to the American Board, and then they determine whether or not they feel you're properly qualified to take the examination. If you're qualified to take the examination, then you pass on to the examining pool the same way everybody does.
And you are certified in that area?
Yes, I am.
In this era of television, I'm a little reluctant to say this, but Quincy was such a person on television.
Yes.
The mythical forensic pathologist.
Yes, sir.
Doctor, we call upon you time to time in Davenport, even though you left the area, to assist us in the area of forensic pathology.
Yes, sir.
On September 17th of 1990, we called upon you, did we not?
Yes.
What did we request you to do?
You requested that I perform an autopsy. Initially, I was contacted by Lieutenant Kern and advised that a body had been found, and he would like me to come out and take a look at the body at the scene.
Did you do that?
Yes.
Why does a pathologist like to do that if at all possible?
Viewing the deceased at the scene of death allows a pathologist to develop a feeling, an understanding of the case, which is just much more difficult looking at pictures. It's not always possible to go to every scene. When you go to a scene, you have a much better idea of the spatial relationship of the scene. You have a sense of one house from the body, or bodies from a given door if inside the house. It fills a lot of gaps from understanding of the case.
This young lady was in an open field, was she not?
Yes.
Were there emergency people present?
Yes.
Were there firefighters and...
Yes, sir. It was dark, and there were firefighters and police officers that had set up emergency lighting.
Did the area appear to be secured as you know those areas?
Yes, it was secured.
As a pathologist on the scene, deputy medical examiner, were you of course permitted to enter the scene?
That's correct, yes.
Tell the jury what you viewed.
I viewed the body of a young girl lying on the grass with areas of charring on the body and on the clothing and on the surrounding grass.
The body was removed, and then what did you do?
The body was removed, and it was then taken to Mercy Hospital in Davenport for autopsy examination.
Did you perform such an examination?
Yes, I did.
Tell the jury what that encompassed.
Yes. The autopsy examination is a systematic process for the examination of a body after death. In a legal environment or medical legal environment, the first thing that happens, the body is inspected with its clothing in place. Any type of foreign material which may be on the body's surface is inspected. The body is completely photographed as it lies on the table, with its clothing in place and any dirt or debris or ligatures or whatever that may be in place are left there. So in a sense, the first part of the autopsy is I see the body as it's presented to me at the scene. After that, the clothing is carefully removed and preserved for evidentiary purposes and handed to the police officers present. The body is then examined without its clothing but not cleaned up because, again, it's possible that additional foreign material or debris may be present between the clothing and the body, and that has to be looked at and taken off. The body is then washed so that any debris is removed because mud or blood or oil or grease or foreign material can obscure and conceal injuries. We then carefully clean the body off and conduct a detailed examination of the external surfaces of the body and make photographs and record what we see. After that, the body cavities are opened and each individual organ in the body is sequentially examined, weighed, and a sample of the organ is removed for microscopic examination. After the trunk is examined, the head is then opened. The brain is removed and the brain is examined. After the brain is examined, the neck organs are finally examined at the end of the autopsy, and the body is then released to the funeral director. After a period of anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks, sometimes sooner, sometimes longer, we receive our microscopic slides back from the laboratory that have been prepared from the small samples that we took at the time of autopsy. These are then examined under the microscope and an additional report is added, and finally, the whole report is put back together and a report is issued.
And did you do this?
Yes, I did.
In this particular case?
Yes, I did.
Doctor, I'm going to show you what has been accepted into evidence as states exhibit number 7. Is that little girl as you view her at the scene?
Yes, it is.
State's Exhibit 15. And 14, are those a couple of photographs of her?
Yes, sir, they are.
That's what you saw when you were at the morgue,
Yes,
just before you performed the autopsy?
yes,
And that's what you saw when you arrived at the scene?
yes, sir.
Doctor, do you have an opinion as to the cause of death based upon the autopsy that you just told us about, and of course your knowledge and training and experience in the area?
Yes, I do.
Will you relate that to the jury?
Yes. My opinion is that the deceased, Jennifer Lewis, died as a result of manual strangulation. Manual strangulation being a term of strangling of the hand, as opposed to ligature strangulation with a belt or rope. She was strangled with the hands.
What else did you find of significance?
There had been injuries to the pelvic organs and rectum.
Could you determine the cause?
Blunt force mechanical injury is as close as I can come to stating the cause.
Mechanical?
This was not a chemical or electrical burn, or it was physical force which caused it.
We're talking about physical force such as a blow.
Such as a blow. Yes, sir.
Do you know anything as a forensic pathologist about the clothing on the little girl?
It was charred, partially melted in some areas, and that was the extent of my observations on the clothing. Because in Iowa, the pathologist himself does not, or herself does not, do the detailed examination of the clothing. We basically survey the clothing briefly and pass it to the Division of Criminalistic Laboratory.
Doctor, you took a series of slides. Do you normally do that?
Yes, I do.
Did that with your own camera?
Yes, I did.
Later they were developed?
Yes.
Had an opportunity to review them?
Yes, I have.
Could you tell us in short how many there are?
I believe there are 9 of them.
And what do they depict?
They are slides which I prepared from the microscopic slides. Obviously, it's a little impractical to demonstrate with a microscope. I took photographs through a microscope with a camera attached to it. These are slides that I saw when I looked through the microscope, when I looked at the tissue samples following the autopsy.
Did you also prepare so you could better explain to the jury the injuries that you saw an overhead or celluloid diagram which has been marked for identification purposes, State's Exhibit 31?
Yes, I did.
That is the exact document that you prepared?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Is it taken from a book that you and others would recognize as being an accurate diagram of a portion of the human body?
Yes, it is.
One as you as pathologists would rely on?
It was taken from Gray's Anatomy.
Your Honor, I propose that the slides Dr. Stevens has just described to this jury be admitted into evidence as one exhibit, that being Exhibit 85, that they be placed in an envelope and so marked.
To the extent that the slides depict microscopic examination of tissue and organs, I have no objection to those slides.
Just a moment, 85 is received into evidence.
The State also offers State's Exhibit 31.
No objection.
31 will be received into evidence.
At this time, I would request permission to publish these to the jury. First of all, Doctor, directing to line 24 on page 802. Doctor, first of all, on State's Exhibit 31, I know the red area in the middle of the screen. Did you place that there, or was that in the textbook?
No, I placed that there. It was not in the textbook.
For what purpose?
For the purpose of demonstrating where the injuries in the pelvic region were.
Okay, can you tell this jury what they are looking at?
Yes. You are looking at a figure of the female human body, as if it were sliced front to back down the middle. You are looking at the body from the side, specifically looking at the right half of the female body from the left side of the body, as if you were looking straight through all of the structures to the left side, so you can clearly see what's inside the body.
And what do we see inside the body?
If I may approach, you see the front of the body here and the buttocks of the body here. The anus is down here. This is a female body, so this is the vagina, is in front of the anus, and the urethra, or the tube that leads from the bladder, is here in front of everything else. Here you see the bladder immediately behind, and in back you see the uterus here, and right in back of the uterus and the bladder you see the lower part of the colon and the upper part of the rectum. I have drawn this area of injury to show the approximate level of injury that occurred and the extent of the injury around the bladder, colon, and this bladder here.
Is that, in your opinion as a pathologist, in examining that, did that come from within the body or from outside the body?
That blow had to be forced inside the body. It would be essentially impossible to get that blow on the outside of the body without finding bruising on the front of the body.
So something entered this young woman's body
Something entered this young woman's body.
and caused that injury.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, referring to the slides in State's Exhibit 85, which you previously described to the jury, I would appreciate it if you would publish them to the jury on the screen before them and explain as you go.
There's a little distortion in this picture.
Just a minute.
Sure.
A.
This is a microscopic slide of Jennifer Lewis's larynx or voice box in her neck. And the upper right-hand corner here shows the air cavity where the voice resonates and where the air passes on the way to the lungs. This is the velvety kind of lining that occurs inside the larynx. And right under it you see This is the velvety kind of lining that occurs inside the larynx. And right under it you see an area of red coloration. You see another area of red coloration here. And these are the ways areas of bleeding look under the microscope. And they indicate areas of bleeding due to mechanical trauma to this area. The normal appearance would be for this area to be the same as it is in the upper left-hand corner. These two areas of bleeding should not be there, and they indicate mechanical trauma.
And 85B.
This is another area also from the larynx, this is from the upper trachea, which is just below the larynx, immediately below the voice box. And this too shows the air cavity in the upper right-hand corner. the lining of the trachea or windpipe here. And again, large areas of bleeding that just don't belong in this environment. The whole area should look like this area down here. This is the cartilage that holds the windpipe open, and again, the abnormal feature is the bleeding there.
Exhibit 85C.
The next slide moves out of the trachea and it moves into the colon and upper part of the rectum, or lower part of the colon. And this shows the way it ought to be. This is the inside of the upper colon and lower colon, and two muscular coats surround it. And you notice that there are no signs of that bleeding that we saw in the previous slide.
Now, 85. D.
However, in the injured area, this is the picture we see. We see disruption of the lining of the rectum with a large gap into the cavity and a huge area, relatively speaking, under the microscope, of blood, which is moving from the wall and out into the space of the rectum.
Exhibit 85E.
Again, this is another view that shows that it goes fairly deeply down into the underlying muscle and extends outward. Again, you see the disruption. It's a
85F.
It's a slightly different view. This is the other side of that area, again showing the tearing of the lining of the rectum. This is a larger area of bleeding and the muscular coat under there, and that's abnormal throughout.
85G.
The next slide is the outside of the uterus, of the wall of the uterus. And again, the whole area pretty much ought to look like this. These are blood vessels, and we ought to see blood in the vessels. And hemorrhaging is by definition when blood leaks out into the tissue. And these are blood vessels that do not belong in the outer lining of the uterus, as we see there.
85H.
This is a microscopic picture taken through the entire wall of the uterus. This being the internal surface of the uterus, the area where the baby would implant during pregnancy, for example. And there is a large muscular coat, which is actually small and would fit under one slide in a child, but in an adult is much thicker. In the upper left-hand corner here, we see more of these red blood cells that are outside of the blood vessels and the outer lining of the uterus there. Again, it doesn't belong.
And 85I.
This is the bladder. The bladder, as the previous exhibit shows, the overhead transparency showed you, is underneath and just in front of the uterus, and just in front of the rectum. And it shows this is the space of the bladder, which contained the urine up here. Here is the lining of the bladder, the internal lining. Then there's a muscular wall that contracts when the bladder voids. And here, outside the outer lining of the bladder, there is injury in the form of red blood cells which are outside of blood vessels.
Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, before returning to the stand, I hand you a photograph, states proposed 26. 26?
Yes. 26 I can identify as the left side of the neck of Jennifer Lewis.
Is that significant?
Yes, it is.
And will it enable you to demonstrate something to the jury that you could not otherwise explain to them?
Yes, it would.
I would ask you to go through all of these, State's Exhibit 26, and as you do, tell the court what they are and whether or not they are necessary for you to tell the jury about the injuries that you described.
Yes. State's Exhibit 24 is a photograph of the left side of Jennifer Lewis's neck after the skin has been folded back and the internal examination had begun. State's Exhibit number 23 is a little bit deeper into the dissection, showing further the bleeding in Jennifer Lewis's neck. State's Exhibit 22 again depicts more of the right side of Jennifer Lewis's neck, as well as the previous exposure of the left side of the neck. It also shows the right side, showing additional areas of bleeding. State's 21 is the back of Jennifer Lewis's larynx, which the area around the esophagus, which runs in the back of the larynx, and also shows areas of bruising. State's 20 is Jennifer Lewis's larynx after it has been opened up for inspection, and it shows the lining surface of the larynx and shows the naked eye appearance of the areas of bleeding, which I have just demonstrated under the microscopic section. And State's 19 is a photograph of the back side of the bladder, showing bruising, and the front side of the vagina and uterine surface, showing areas of bleeding and bruising. And State's 18, I believe, this is back to the esophagus, and it shows the areas of bleeding around the esophagus and trachea, just below the larynx or voice box.
Your Honor, the State offers into evidence State's Exhibits 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 26.
I would renew my original objection made on the grounds previously stated.
The objection is overruled. Exhibits 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 26 are received into evidence.
Directing your attention to page 811, line 12. Mr. Stevens, will you explain to the jury what you saw and determine by each of these photographs and what they are now viewing?
This is State's Exhibit. Oh, sure.
You know what? I think we can just move that.
Okay. This is State's Exhibit 26. State's Exhibit 26, as you will see, shows the left side of the neck. Here is the left ear of Jennifer Lewis, and it shows these irregular areas of reddish-brown discoloration and streaking on the side of the neck. These are typical bruises made by manual strangulation.
Now I want to direct your attention to page 812, line 13. For the record, doctor, did you say strangulation by means of the hands?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. State's Exhibit 24, doctor?
State's Exhibit 24 shows the neck after the skin in the front of the neck has been incised or cut up, the sides of the neck, and then folded back over the face. It shows the structures that are in the neck immediately beneath the skin. And it shows the muscles here that we refer to as strap muscles. They look like straps that run up and down the neck. They ordinarily should be a nice pink tan color, as you see at the lower end of the muscle block. The red splotches of discoloration, which are areas of bruising or beating or bruising, as we refer to as a contusion. You can call them hemorrhaging, but basically massive bruising of the muscles of the neck.
State's Exhibit number 23, Doctor?
Yes. State's Exhibit 23 shows the same, only shows a little bit more of what's going on the right side, and shows the larger area of reddish coloration of the left and right sides, involving the so-called strap muscles, which again ought to be a nice pink tan color, like here.
And State's Exhibit number 22.
States 22 shows in fact two things. The first is the additional bruising of the skin itself. This is sort of coming out a little bit. It's not as deep as the other areas. It also shows areas of bruising. It also shows an additional area of bruising that was in the main muscle mass that goes up the side of the neck and attaches to the skull just behind the ear. And in this area, just below the ear, is an additional area of bruising in a different muscle mass.
Exhibit 21, Doctor?
States 21 is a photograph of the back of the larynx, and it shows the muscles of the esophagus, which have been dissected apart, and which shows again areas of bruising. The previous photographs were in the front of the larynx. This is the back of the larynx and shows bruising in the back of the larynx and around the gullet or esophagus.
State's Exhibit 20, Doctor.
Yes. States 20 is the interior of the larynx, and it shows, running horizontally across the picture, the vocal cords. The right vocal cord here is looking from the back towards the front, and it shows, the left vocal cord here is a little area of bruising and blotchy areas of dark coloration, which are little areas of bruising, and these are the areas that I showed you in the microscopic slide of the larynx. This gives you a better idea of the extent and distribution of them. And a little bit more on the top, which is the epiglottis, and in the back, the fuzzy outline of the tongue.
State's Exhibit 19.
State's Exhibit 19 is the uterus and the bladder. The uterus is actually in front of the picture and a little difficult to make out in point of contrast. Here is the left ovary and right ovary and the fallopian tubes on the side. At the bottom of the picture, right around the cervix and the upper vagina, there is an area of bleeding and bruising. And up towards the middle of the picture, you see an area of bluish coloration in the back wall of the bladder. When you have fresh blood, which is ordinarily red, but viewed through a pink-white tissue, this is the blue. That some bruises are blue rather than red. This is the area of bruising in the back of the bladder.
Doctor, the last State's Exhibit 18.
State's Exhibit 18 is back to the throat. I apologize for getting out of order. This shows the back of the larynx before it's being opened. This is on the bottom of the picture here. There is the tube, which is the windpipe, which is clearly identifiable. Just above is the collapsed tube, which is the esophagus or the gullet, through which the food passes, and on the left and right side, the back of these structures both show extensive areas of dark red bleeding.
Thank you. Doctor, based on what you observed and your knowledge and experience as a pathologist, do you have an opinion as to whether or not the injuries that are depicted in State's Exhibit 31 occurred post-mortem or pre-mortem?
They're not post-mortem, they are pre-mortem.
These injuries occurred while the little girl was alive.
Absolutely.
And the cause of death, doctor?
Manual strangulation.
No further questions.
You may cross-examine, counsel.
Doctor, based upon your education, your experience, your observation of this particular deceased, Jennifer Lewis, based upon your microscopic examinations, based upon your gross examinations, do you have an opinion as to a time range between which the injuries could have been applied to this child before she actually died?
Yes, I do.
What is your opinion?
They were definitely within the last 24 hours. Most probably within the last 12 hours or less. But beyond that, I cannot, unlike Quincy, cannot come to a closer time estimate.
What is there about strangulation that causes a human being to expire or die?
The strangulation can cause several injuries that can cause the human being to expire. The first problem is a relatively light amount of force may obstruct the return of blood from the head through the veins. The veins are very low pressure blood vessels and does not take very much force to obstruct them. So you can obstruct the veins, but not have enough force to obstruct the arteries. The heart keeps pumping through the head, but the blood has no place to go, and the head loads up with blood, and that causes death. The second thing that you can do, you can apply enough force to actually clamp off the arterial blood, so no blood gets into the head. The third thing that you can do, you can apply enough force to mechanically break the larynx. And if you break the larynx mechanically, you get swelling around the vocal cords, which prevented the decedent from breathing through the vocal cords. And so that can happen even if the blood is not interrupted long enough to cause brain death.
Under any of the results that you discussed, is the time of dying 4 or 5 seconds like we see on television?
It can be, but usually isn't.
How long usually would it take for someone to expire, either from the blood flow obstructions you described, the airflow, or a combination of the two?
Usually a matter of a few minutes.
Was there anything about the results of your autopsy from which you determined where geographically these injuries were applied to Jennifer Lewis?
No, sir, there wasn't.
I have no other questions.
Mr. Walton, do you have any redirect?
Directing your attention to line 818, line 20. As to the injury of the throat, strangulation that you described, is that one as a physician that you associate with pain?
Yes.
No further questions.
Are you comfortable with telling us whether or not the person in such pain related to the throat injury would be struggling if possible, wildly desperate for life, or air, or blood?
I don't think I can tell you I can tell you that the individual would be struggling for air. How violently the individual will be capable of resisting is not something that I can tell you. It varies from individual to individual. The deceased would definitely be experiencing extreme air hunger. It would be a most unpleasant experience.
Thank you. That's all.
Nothing further.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and take a break at noon. We'll start again at 1:15. Please be ready to go then. Keep your ammunition in mind. Do not discuss the case. And we'll keep it open. Please rest. autopsy at 1:15.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.